Today's proclamation is based on a sermon I delivered on the second Sunday in Lent in 2017. May it continue to bear good news for us today. I don't know what it feels like to hold life inside of my body. I mean, I've been told that pregnancy is a pretty remarkable and incredible thing. But I've also been told that it is profoundly uncomfortable. I've also been told that it's oftentimes very difficult physically, emotionally, spiritually even, as the process of bearing new life is not an easy one. So I've heard. I've also been told that pregnancy is often a deeply anxious and conflicted season of life, even amidst the hope and promise of the life that is emerging from within. And so as much as I have heard about what it means to carry life inside of the human body, as a person who does not have a uterus, I don't fully know what it means to be pregnant and to really bear new life into the world. And as far as we know, Jesus was also unable to speak of pregnancy firsthand, as it seemed that he only experienced the mother-child bodily connection as an infant being birthed, rather than as a mother giving birth. Which has me wondering today about what it might mean for us that this Gospel of John text we have portrays a Jesus who responds to Nicodemus' risky nighttime visitation with a strikingly feminine image of the divine. The God whose living water is bearing new spiritual life like a mother bears a child. What does this mean for us? I mean, if we take the birthing metaphor seriously and all of its visceral implications, perhaps we must remember, first and foremost, that birthing is rarely a quiet and reserved moment in the lives of those gathered for such a new beginning. For when we are birthed, our bodies are literally crushed and contorted and deformed so that we might then emerge into life beyond the womb. Much pain is endured to make this new life known, both the pain of the one giving birth and also pain in the life of the one being birthed. And more than a few contemporary theologians are lifting up this idea, this imagery of being birthed, this analogy, as a metaphor not just for what happens to us in our spiritual lives of faith, but they're applying this metaphor much more broadly as well, as a metaphor for where we as humanity perhaps are right now in the midst of history. For indeed there is much suffering and wailing and crying out in pain throughout the world at this current moment. And perhaps, these theologians posit, perhaps the pain that we are experiencing in the world is not the pain of an ending, but is instead part of the birth pangs of the new beginning, the emerging new life that God is bringing for the sake of the life of the entire world. And so if this is the case, and if the turmoil that we are experiencing now throughout the world is the discomfort of being birthed into something new, and we are thus learning what it might mean to be fully dependent upon the grace and love and deliverance of the one who births us, this also leaves me wondering then, in what way are we to live then, as this new life emerges? Do we simply ride the waves, so to speak, and just let all of this happen? Or does God have a part for us in this process as we go? Since this birth metaphor has delivered to us through the story of Pharisee Nicodemus in John's Gospel, perhaps if we look a little more broadly at Nicodemus' storyline in the Gospel, it might bear some fruit for us as to this direction we're heading. But first of all, in John's Gospel, it seems that Nicodemus is in the kind of crisis of his own, a spiritual birth process that's happening. For initially, he meets Jesus not in the openness of day, but under cover of darkness at night. Not unlike perhaps the darkness of the womb. And then Nicodemus moves from this dark place, tentatively trusting in Jesus, who has appeared in his life. And Nicodemus' next appearance in the story is 4 chapters from now, when he appears alongside his other colleagues, his other Pharisees, those other religious leaders in whom he's in relationship with. These are the ones who are trying to capture Jesus, to eliminate him. And Nicodemus then uses his voice in the presence of this group, right in the center of power in his community, and there offers a dissenting opinion about Jesus. And speaks as an advocate then for his sibling, for Jesus who is in need, saying that he at least deserves a fair trial as anyone does. And then we don't hear from Nicodemus again in the Gospel until almost the very end, until after Jesus has been killed and is dead, when Nicodemus comes to anoint Jesus' body with 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes, providing what is needed in the midst of death, accompanying his grieving community. So perhaps in the midst of the overarching cosmic reality of God bringing new life into the world, in and through Jesus the Christ, perhaps God's womb was also simultaneously birthing a new reality for Nicodemus in his own life, leading him to act for the sake of others around him. And so if Nicodemus was birthed by Christ into this spiritual practice of community advocacy, this practice of caring for people in the midst of death and suffering, and if Nicodemus was birthed into the spiritual practice of speaking up and making his voice heard when people in power, even colleagues, are abusing their offices in life, if that's the new life that Nicodemus was birthed and called into, I wonder if perhaps we are being birthed and called into a similar way as well, that embodies Christ in our world, here and now. And if we continue to be serious about this birth metaphor, then this process will probably continue to be uncomfortable and painful and even risky. But perhaps it is through this very action that God's new life will continue to emerge for us and for the whole world, and for perhaps even the entire cosmos. So this is not only the way of Lent, but it is also the way of the cross. And it is the very way of our God who leads the way through it. May this life continue to be known in this season and beyond.